First thing, something that's missing is this whole building here. During the expo, it was where the Southern California counties had their displays. Afterward, it became San Diego's first civic auditorium. It was a beautiful place, and then it burned down. November 25th, 1925, in one of the strangest coincidences in our city's history, a fire caused by a faulty heater happened just as hundreds of people were beginning to show up there anyway for the annual Fireman's Ball. You can see the place was reduced to rubble, and that was the end of one of the really beautiful buildings from 1915. And in case you're curious what was built in its place, the Natural History Museum. But many others are still around from the exposition, and let's go with Balboa Park Ranger Kim Duclos to see some of them. There were state buildings that displayed things from the various states 100 years ago. California, you already know. Here's New Mexico. You can probably tell by the look of it then and now. Now it's the Balboa Park Club. And then there's this building. Do you recognize it? Today it's home to the Hall of Nations International House, and hardly anybody remembers what it used to be.
Yes, of all the buildings from 1915 that still remain, this is perhaps the most forlorn and most forgotten, the Kansas State Building.
The Kansas Building. Back then, this showpiece of the sunflower and wheat state looked a little different. For one thing, it had a dome up there. Where'd it go?
Well, this was supposed to be a temporary building, like so many others. The dome probably wasn't structurally sound and was removed.
Temporary? Really? Yes, and that's what's surprising about the Kansas Building and so many others in the park. While it was being reinforced, we got to look underneath, and you can see how it was originally made just for the short term.
I think we have evidence of that here. There's just not that much holding these buildings up because they were designed to last maybe 2 or 3 years at most, and yet here they are all these years later.
Show me some example of that.
Yeah, if you look just over behind us, you can see how it's this simple. There's no massive foundations, not a lot of concrete or anything. It's just some wood, there's some plaster in here. Again, very simple construction because it was designed not to last very long.
Even those that were built to last have been modified. Their ornamentation ended up here in what Kim calls the park's boneyard. Those round orbs, for example, are from the California Building.
Again, many of the buildings were designed to be temporary. Look at all the work that these craftsmen put into things. It's really rather remarkable, all this low bas relief.
The loving attention to detail they represent, dating as far back as 100 years, removed in renovation or out of earthquake concern. From the outside, in their day, they added to the exposition's exotic beauty and something more. Look closely, Kim says. Back then, this was pretty ornate for reinforced concrete.
But you can really see this. It's almost like looking into the inside of an ancient sequoia or something. This is like looking into the interior of these 100-year-old concrete buildings, but still pretty much sound and intact.
Some of these things will be displayed now and then, but the rest, well, you can't just throw Balboa Park history away. Will they lie here in the boneyard another century or a millennium?
I only wonder what some archaeologist, if somehow they're to happen on this thousands of years from now, and we've never moved this, they're probably going to think this was some civilization or something over here.
And some just random things that give you a smile. The Reflecting Pond, a 100-year-old movie, shows a gong being rung to call the fish to eat. And a century later, it's fun to think that their descendants, their great-great-great-great-grandfish maybe, might still be here. And well, so are the pigeons, and I mention that only because, believe it or not, and this may be one of the all-time marvels of exposition marketing, what might have been seen as a nuisance instead became a highly promoted attraction. You just had to go see and be among the Balboa Park pigeons. There is so much that takes us back to 1915 if we just look. Here is where Charles Lindbergh would be honored and the Beatles would perform. And did I mention it was where the San Diego Chargers played until 1966, in Balboa Stadium. Added to over the decades, it eventually seated more than 40,000, but then was torn down because it didn't meet earthquake standards. What remains is the field at San Diego High School, hallowed ground here where the biggest events in our city happened, from the football Harbor Bowl to a Woodrow Wilson presidential address. Balboa Stadium here also goes back to 1915.